Good afternoon. We've changed our schedule basically because of the holiday for Martin Luther King. Long ago and far away, I went once to the motel in Memphis that has been turned into a museum for Martin Luther King. And it's a quite wonderful museum. It's exactly as it was the day he was murdered by the coward who was hiding in one of the rooms. He died there, and they've made the whole of the motel now a museum. It's no longer a place you stay, it's a place you visit, and it's right off the Mississippi River. And I was about to lead a group of Cal alumni down the Mississippi to New Orleans. And so two of my better friends, Veronica and Richard Charvat, they were with me, and we took the tour of the motel. And the darndest things have been brought together there. The famous bus that I don't know if you even know the Old South, but in the Old South, when I grew up, African Americans sat in the back of the bus and white Americans sat in the front. And it was just a known phenomenon until blacks objected to that, because if there were no seats for them, but there were empty seats, they thought they should be able to sit in those. And this black, courageous woman did that and broke this stupid rule that was part of the whole segregation of the two races, like the bathrooms for blacks and the bathrooms for whites, and the water fountains for blacks and the water fountains for whites. And so we spent the day there tracing the steps, getting the lectures. So we had a real feeling for the Martin Luther King phenomenon. And if you're ever in Memphis, you ought to go there. There's several things of great interest. Very near the motel is the cotton area that is the storage area for cotton waiting to be shipped down the river. And it's also a museum. It's very interesting because it shows you a lot that you might not know about King Cotton, given that the Memphis area and that part of the Mississippi River was very rich cotton land. And then if you're really interested, there's a phenomenon on the other side of the river that shows you how crazy Americans can be. Elvis Presley, who was not from Memphis, bought a huge piece of land and built himself a glitzy, over-the-top mansion. And that is also open to the public. And the public goes by the thousands to that Graceland. And all the music is playing, and the gift shop the cash registers are ringing up the money. And then with a horde of other people, you have to wait in line, and then you get to go through Graceland. And Elvis, of course, is very typical of the Deep South, is buried in the yard. In Virginia, where I came from, we only buried dogs in the yard. We actually went to cemeteries for humans. But in the Old South, deep South, you could be buried in your front yard, backyard. So he and his parents are buried there at Graceland. And it's tasteful, it's not over the top. There was a threat once, and it frightened the palace in London. There was an idea that the famous Duke, the dum-dum of the royal family, who had given up the throne for Wallace Warfield Simpson, twice divorced, dreadful woman. And so what they would do in this place in America is build a special tomb for the two of them. And the palace was aghast that a former king of Britain and the British Empire would be buried somewhere like Graceland. And so they prevailed upon Elizabeth II to call her Uncle David, who was living in Paris in his glorious exile, and offer him a place for burial in England. And his one condition was that his Duchess be buried with him. So if you ever want to know where the guy that the family called David is stashed away, you can go out to a palace complex beyond London and you can see him and his Duchess in the sense that you can see the burial place. So we went over to see where our king, the man who could not be shown on television on a good day with any shot that was below the hips, below the navel rather, no hip shots, because God forbid that Americans be corrupted with the idea of watching Elvis Presley. This was the biggest scandal of the Ed Sullivan Show. Maybe you were alive then. If you were not, you didn't miss anything. But Mr. Blue Suede Shoes, Mr. Hound Dog, and all the other teenage hits was on Ed Sullivan. And Veronica and Richard and I got a chance to see all of that because that's shown in Graceland. Everything is shown in Graceland. His movies, dreadful movies. So we did that as part of our celebration of going, but mainly to see what happened with the Reverend Martin Luther King. We've tried in Washington, D.C. with little success, I must say. We have mucked up the mall, which used to be a nice green open space and which only had a few things on it, like the Air and Space Museum, certainly the Lincoln Memorial, the Jefferson Memorial. And now it's got every kind of memorial, a World War II memorial, an Eisenhower memorial, and it has a horrible, horrible statue of Martin Luther King. I don't know who they got to do it, but he looks like Mao Zedong, and it should be knocked down as soon as possible. And if you want to really remember what a great man Martin Luther King was, you can go to, if you want to a current movie that shows you what the FBI tried to do under Hoover to besmirch the character of Martin Luther King and failed, like Hoover often did, particularly in his old age when he should have retired years ago. Anyway, that's the Martin Luther King that I remember, and he's a wonderful guy. And we just did his birthday, so we didn't do me. And now we're doing me on Tuesday. So I want to make comments, and I want to ask you a question also. You know, if you, and I assumed you did, live through the insurrection, the recent one, then you know what it was like if you lived in New Jersey in 1860, when the South began its insurrection and started the Civil War with fire eaters, first in South Carolina, and then spreading to the other Confederate states. It only spread, in case you don't know it, when Lincoln, feeling he had no recourse ordered the army that was loyal to go back down to South Carolina and retake Fort Sumter, which had to surrender. And so Lincoln did give that order. And when the order came out that a Northern army would enter the South, then the Southern states began their insurrection, starting with the state of Virginia. It's strange the way the Americans work these things. But then all the way down and all the way across to Texas, they left the Union and then fought the most deadly war we've ever fought. The American, as the Southerners call it, war between the states, and as the Yankees call it, the Civil War. But enough on that. I'm here today to talk about California, but I wanted to ask you one more question. There are many of you are lawyers, and let's say I happen to know that Renata owns a car, a very nice car, she and Robert, and I see them often going out to get to the car to run an errand. Now let us just assume that Renata is not doing anything but just driving the car one day and offering me a ride. And I am going to rob the bank over in Citibank, right across the street from Piedmont Garden. And in the process of the robbery, I kill a man. You are aware that Renata could be found guilty for being the driver, particularly if she knows what I'm going to do. She's going to share in the profits of robbing the bank. But all she did was drive. She did not shoot. She did not carry a gun. And you realize, I hope, so that you don't plan a robbery anytime soon, that in fact, Renata could be found guilty, even though she didn't carry an arm, a pistol, a rifle, and she did not shoot anybody. I want you to keep that in mind because of all the things that are happening now. One of the charges against Mr. Trump could be a charge involved in the murder of 5 people at the Capitol, in that he incurred their good wishes for this insurrection. It's just worth knowing that he could be a murderer as well as all the other bad things he is, but we'll leave that for now. And I want to tell you one other story before I get to California. When I went and did my master's degree in history at the University of Missouri in Kansas City, because I wanted to work in the Truman Library in Independence. I'm a great admirer of Truman, and I was going to do my master's thesis on an aspect of his firing MacArthur, General MacArthur. So it was that I lived in an area that was called Tornado Alley. It was just amazing. You could see the tornadoes coming, spinning across the flat plains of Kansas and Missouri, coming up from the south, going north on Tornado Alley. And I thought of that last night because I didn't get a bit of sleep, and it's still howling on the 15th floor where I live in a windstorm like we've not had in recent times. So maybe one of the tornadoes got lost and came to Piedmont Gardens to visit all of us last night. But I do know that several people lost several things. I have a tree as big as I am, and it's on my deck, and it's at another end of the deck now. And I know that Dave Getty lost his screens, these big screens that we have that you can push back when you go out onto the deck. Or if you don't have that kind of a deck, then you have protection. In this case, his screen is gone with the wind. And so now I stop rambling and I talk to you about California. California, a very strange state. It's one way you can see California in the old days was do what a famous wife of a famous mayor, Mayor Alioto, used to have fights with his wife, and she would leave and announce to the press that she was leaving and she was going to go on a tour of the missions. Now, what are these missions? Well, they're very famous churches that were built during the Spanish and then the Mexican time when Mexico and before it, Spain ruled over California. And they range all along the California coast. I was in a wedding once in Pasadena, and the wedding was in the Mission Church. The mission there is Archangel Gabriel Mission. But you don't have to go all the way to Pasadena. You can go right here in San Francisco to Mission Dolores. It's a beautiful church right on Dolores Street. And you can go there and have a nice picnic because right next to it is a wonderful park. And right next to it is the home of a friend of mine, Pat Witt, who has a wonderful big house on an incline coming up from the Mission Church. And she has enough land to have a garden. And you don't know how precious the garden is when you don't have one. And she had one for years there near Mission Dolores. And you can go all the way up to Santa Rosa, and there's a mission there. So you can do the missions. And it's part of the heritage of California before it was an American state. And it's quite nice to do. It's historic. The mission churches are beautiful. You can often have a picnic. And so you can follow the history of California through these missions. Now, it's quite well known that particularly the Franciscans, which is an order in the Roman Catholic Church, were less than kind to the Indians because, as I've told you every time I've talked, I think, America was not empty when we got here. We just thought it was. There's a famous book from the 60s when people were writing revisionist treatises. And this book is called The Invasion of America. And it's talking about the fact that the Indians saw us as invaders, not as do-gooders, but as people who came and disturbed their way of life, and in many cases acted in a very cruel and unjust way to them. And certainly the story is told of the Franciscan missions treating these Indians very poorly. But so it was, and so it happened. And they remind us that they were here before us. And the mission churches are a living example of what can happen to a people who will fade away from history. Although a few are still around, and I love it when it breaks open. This week in the press, the Ohlone made claim as an Indian group on a piece of territory right here in Oakland at 150th Street. and it's been ceded to them. And when you are like me, you go up to not Lake Tahoe, but a lake called Pinecrest. And in Pinecrest, there are now 3, there used to be only 2, summer resorts run by the University of California at Berkeley. They're called Camp Blue and Camp Gold. And they've added a 3rd camp, Camp Oski. Oski, of course, is a celebration of the golden bear. Strange Californians. They've killed all the great bears, the grizzlies, and there are none left in California. And now we have them as tokens of our resort life. So you can go to Camp Blue and Camp Gold or Camp Oski. They're on the primitive side. They are a wooden floor and a wooden frame, and then a tent stretched over the wooden frame, and you can sleep around 12 people. And families like to come up there. It's on federal land, so you have to be careful. The feds don't like it when you steal sugar pines. What is a sugar? Well, it's a pine cone that's almost a foot long. In some cases, it is a foot long, and you're not supposed to take them. But they're wonderful decorations for Christmas. And every time I used to go up and lecture at Camp Blue and Camp Gold, I'd come home with a pine cone. And so did my friends Richard and Veronica. Veronica was very good at spotting pine cones and waiting till midnight to go out and collect herself 1 or 2. And now when I go to their home in Wren, I see those pine cones come out at Christmas time. Another little token from Lake Pinecrest. So California is loaded with those types of things. The big, of course, lake is Lake Tahoe here in the north. But even the Southern Californians have a series of lakes that are often used on movie sets, because that's one of the phenomena of California. When California moved into the 20th century, movies moved here. They didn't start here, like many people think. There wasn't always a Hollywood. In fact, Mack Sennett and others started the film industry in New York, out on Long Island. And then it moved towards California, but not directly to Hollywood. In fact, very near here, we have made tours. We people in Piedmont Gardens who do take tours when there isn't a virus. And we've gone to a place around an hour from here, where in fact, many of the early, not only Mack Sennett, but Charlie Chaplin films were made before Chaplin himself moved down to Hollywood, which then became the film capital of the United States, and in many people's way of thinking, of the world, because there are so many films generated now, not just in Hollywood itself, but they love to go on location. But many times they go on location right here in Hollywood. I mean, not in Hollywood, but in California. Let me give you an example of a big film we're going to see on the first day of February. We're going to see a wonderful Spencer Tracy, Katharine Hepburn, Sidney Poitier film. Guess Who's Coming to Dinner? And where was it filmed? Right downtown San Francisco, in a beautiful San Francisco mansion house. And it's in color, so the city never looked better. Spencer Tracy never looked better. Katharine Hepburn never looked better. And Sidney Poitier looks great. And he gets to marry a white woman. Heavens to Betsy. what people think. Guess Who's Coming to Dinner? It's a wonderful film. And we're showing it 2 nights, so make sure you see it, because you don't often get to see the 2 greats, Tracy and Hepburn, and the new great, Sidney Poitier, in a wonderful film shot here locally with a wonderful cast and in color. And so it was that Hollywood also came to dear old California, changing the nature of Los Angeles. And even though you don't want to necessarily go to the missions, like Mission Dolores, maybe you want to go to Hollywood. I have taken tours also to Hollywood for Cal Berkeley. And one of the great moments is to go to Warner Brothers, because Warner Brothers still keeps its old studio intact. How do they do that? They rent out those big old buildings, the soundtracks and all the rest, to TV shows. So the Westerns that you think you're seeing on television, Rawhide, Matt Dillon, all those are filmed, if they're filmed anywhere in the area, at Warner Brothers. It's a wonderful, wonderful studio to go to. You can go and stand at the corner of the soundtrack where Ingrid Bergman and Humphrey Bogart were rehearsing their lines for Casablanca, because it was filmed. I hope you don't think it was actually filmed in the Moroccan city of Casablanca. It was filmed on the Warner Brothers back lot. And they have kept all of that and all of the scripts. And you can do research there. For one of my books, I did that. I found out that Warner's had sold the scripts and the letters, and they sold at the University of Southern California. So I went to the University of Southern California, and there I found everything I wanted to find when I wrote the book that had to deal with the subject of making films in Hollywood. Warner Brothers. And go down there. It's open to the public, makes for a wonderful tour. You can have lunch in one of the places where all the stars like Bette Davis used to have lunch in between the shoots of a film we're going to show of hers. It's coming up in Easter week. It's called Jezebel. It's a story that one of our friends here on the Piedmont Gardens will love, because it's set in New Orleans. And I've chosen it mainly for Louis, who comes from New Orleans. And it's a wonderful, wonderful Bette Davis film. She won her 2nd Academy Award for making Jezebel. She's not a very nice person, but it's a perfect role for Bette Davis to chew up the scenery. And so we will see Miss Davis, who, by the way, was the woman, the person who named the Academy Award Oscar. And now everyone says, here's your Oscar. It wasn't called that until Bette Davis came around. So it's another aspect of California life that you only get to see by going out and visiting the places that are there to visit. Whether it's Charlie Chaplin's studio, which is still intact, right down the road, an hour from us, or whether it's the big studios. Most of the big studios are gone now. MGM is gone, 20th Century Fox is gone, but Warner Brothers is still there to be seen, to be enjoyed, and to connect with as part of California history. California got a change in its aspects. I don't know if you know the history of African Americans in this country, but since we just talked about Martin Luther King, and you notice in most of the cases of leadership, their leaders are all called reverends. because they found in the evangelical side of Christianity, particularly in the Baptist, Southern Baptist and Southern Methodist, a sense of rewarding, because in slavery days, at least you were told that there was something better waiting for you, that when you died and went to heaven, then you would enjoy all the fruits that heaven could give you. So of course, Southern blacks caught up in the awful business of slavery had something, at least through God and the traditions of their faith, to look forward to. So I don't know where I was going with that thought, so I have to go on to another thought. It's not easy when you lecture without notes. I'll take you to a time when California was like, no, I'll go back to African Americans. When the Civil War was over, when Lincoln emancipated the slaves, when the slaves had a choice, most of them did not leave the South. They continued to live under very terrible conditions. They just were free. A few of them did what I told you the last time. They became exodusters. They did leave the South. They hated the place, and they went across the borders into what had been free states, but they were few in number. The big exit from the South occurred the first time during World War I. There were many, many jobs opened in the North, so Southern blacks went north to cities like Detroit, Chicago, and all those northern cities that offered jobs and opportunities. Now, the next big immigration out of the South occurs after World War II. Many, many African Americans went off to war in the Pacific. And to go off to war meant you went through California. And what they saw, they liked. And so when they came back, they stayed in California. And suddenly two cities that were very close to us here, the city of Oakland and the city of Richmond, became, in many ways, more African American than white. And you saw this happen in many distinct ways. One, the jobs that they found were well-paying, and the places they got to live were decent. And so what were these jobs that were being created in California? California became the center of two huge new industries that had not been here before. One was shipbuilding. President FDR had promised to build so many ships. He means now basically freighters, to get the stuff from here to the battle scenes. He'd build so many it'd be a fleet of ships that if you line them up, you could walk from one to the other, from America all the way to Europe. And these ships were built in the Kaiser shipyard here in the East Bay, in the Bechtel shipyard over in Marin. And they were amazing. Kaiser was able to launch an ocean-going freighter in 4 days, unheard of. But he used the Henry Ford method. Henry Ford built his automobiles in an assembly line. And these freighters were built along the same Ford lines of assembly so that you could put the pre-made parts in line, and then when your designer came by, he'd pick up what he needed for the hull, what he needed for the decking, and in no time. And to prove that he could do it in a fast, Mr. Kaiser launched an ocean-going ship in 4 days, which is amazing. One of those ships is still there near the old Kaiser yard and near the shipyard because it's been preserved. And the women who came to work there, both black and white, were known as Rosie the Riveter or Wendy the Welder. And these were people in the thousands who took up these jobs and came from other parts of the country to flood into California and change California for all time. Now, what is left is a museum. You can go to Richmond, to Point Richmond, and therefore look at what remains. I took the film committee and some other people to see this phenomena because they not only have the actual shipyard and one of the actual ships, they also have a little movie theater to show you movies of this happening and a canteen which serves a wonderful lunch. So we did everything. We saw the movies, we saw the canteen, we saw the old ship. We did everything. And we got a feeling for how wonderful this place had been and what an opening it was for African Americans who decided not to go somewhere else, but to stay in California. So this flood occurs early and stays long, making up the California that we know today. Now, not only was California here in the north, this major shipyard and it wasn't the only ones. There were shipyards down in the deep south along the Gulf of Mexico, and there were shipyards up in Maine. But the biggest ones were here in California. And then, to complete that story, there was a man who knew how to make airplanes. And airplanes were a big industry in World War II. This is Donald Douglas. And Douglas Aircraft is down in the Southland. And there they turned out plane after plane after airplane, planes that could be shipped on Lend-Lease to Britain and our ally, the Soviet Union. People used to say, well, don't worry, we paid for it, but we'll get it back. General Marshall, who was a major military figure in World War II, not Eisenhower. Marshall was the major advisor in the White House to FDR. And when he heard the story about getting the Lend-Lease back, he said, it's like getting chewing gum back after it's been chewed. Nobody wants it. And it was true that we didn't get it back in any feasible way. It is also true that it was the major arsenal of the war, and we were it. And California was one of the its. And Donald, the man who was making airplanes down in Long Beach, I thought of it at last, Douglas Aircraft, making them by the thousands. It's gone now, unfortunately. All of our aircraft production has moved into one. It's moved into Bill Boeing's old company. Bill Boeing has a great aircraft making industry up in the Seattle area, King County. And Boeing is now the only one left because it's in great competition. In competition with who? Well, with the Europeans. They have something called Airbus, which is fabulously successful. It took a city called Toulouse in the southwest of France and created 10,000 high-tech jobs, which made all the Europeans very happy. As you can imagine, 10,000 high-tech jobs go a long way to keeping a country working at the high end and not at the low end. Now, while we were doing that in World War II, before that, we had something else happen to us. In the 1930s, we had the Great Depression. And in the 1930s, the Depression hit very hard in states like Oklahoma. Oklahoma has a topsoil that if you don't treat it nicely, that means keep a crop growing, you find that your topsoil blows away. And that's what happened in the 30s in Oklahoma. The topsoil blew away in dust storms, incredible dust storms. And not just in that one state, but all through that area. And so these people called the Okies got up and left. And we have an epic novel about that by the man who made the state of California his bellwether. It's John Steinbeck, of course. And Steinbeck's first great novel about California is The Grapes of Wrath, made also into an excellent, excellent film, starring Henry Fonda as the Job guy with his mother and all the children. And they all got into this old broken down truck and drove all the way to California. Why? To get jobs picking oranges in the orange groves of Southern California. Steinbeck went on to write many histories as novels. The famous book that he writes besides Grapes of Wrath. By the way, that was the Soviets thought a wonderful piece of propaganda that was anti-American. So they asked to borrow it and they showed it throughout the Soviet Union. And they saw suddenly that it had backfired on them because the Soviet citizens were all saying, well, they might have been poor, but at least they had a truck to drive all the way to California. We don't have that. So you have to be careful how you use your Steinbeck. Steinbeck will also give us a great novel on the other end of California, where you're growing lettuce. And in that area, you're going to take lettuce, which is a very expensive winter crop in northern cities like Chicago and Toledo and Cincinnati, and certainly New York and Boston and Philadelphia. And so you'll grow the lettuce in the lettuce fields of California and then put them in railroad cars that are refrigerated. And then you will send the railroad refrigerated car all the way so that while in California, the head of lettuce might sell for a nickel, a dime, in chilly, frozen, snowy Chicago, New York, or Boston, it'd sell for several dollars. So you'd make a fortune if you could get those heads of lettuce all the way to those northeastern cities. And you got those heads of lettuce from California. And the story of that is another epic Steinbeck story. And in between, you get those wonderful small Steinbeck novels. He is the novelist par excellence of California. You get them down there in that little place we all love to go to. Clint Eastwood bought up part of it, even a famous bar. And we'll be seeing Clint Eastwood soon in 2 films, Play Misty for Me, and also 2 Mules for Sister Sarah. And this is Monterey, and this is Carmel. And this is a wonderful stretch where you have Steinbeck writing you short stories, longer short stories, novellas, so that you get a feeling and a sense of what this California is like. The one that the Okies came to, and now the one that the farmers down in the Salinas Valley are turning into a wonderful winter wonderland of crops. This is called counter-cyclical farming. It's done all over the world. You don't think that those blueberries that you eat at breakfast in January came from us. These big blueberry and strawberry and all those berries that you get are grown all the way down in South America. The very famous man who did the first open heart surgery bought himself in Peru and in Chile great stretches that when it's winter here, it's summer there, and you grow these marvelous fruits and you ship them north in wonderful air-conditioned super jets from Boeing, cargo jets. And so they arrive at Piedmont Gardens as a fruit cup, but not grown locally, but in some cases grown as far away as South America. It's amazing what you can do with a little bit of technology and a little bit of effort and a little bit of thinking. You can get berries in January, and then you can get lettuce and other items that don't grow in the wintertime. You can get them here. We must have a hold on these things because everything I order, and I don't order it with lettuce, comes with lettuce anyway. A whole big salad. Somebody's getting rich on lettuce. So Steinbeck did that for us, and not just a few times. All those Cannery Row novellas, sometimes just a story about a bus, sometimes a story about winning his Nobel Prize, because he did win one. We are planning, if we can ever get out of this virus condition, and we're supposed to get our shots this week, to make a Piedmont Garden trip. Where to? Well, the people in Salinas, which is a very interesting town, by the way, know that Steinbeck is a world-class person with a huge history, and they've built a fantastically big, you can see it from miles away, Steinbeck Museum. And in this Steinbeck Museum, you go in and you can see every movie that was made from every book that he wrote. And you can see the book, because each movie is shown like we show them here on a TV, and it's surrounded so that in the next little cubicle, there's another TV with another Steinbeck movie. And then you can get lunch next door. And you can go across the street and across the field to a house that Steinbeck lived in. So it's a Steinbeck Center, and it's simply wonderful. And we will do that as soon as we get out of this pandemic, which can't happen soon enough for me. And so California celebrates itself up and down the coast. It has its own Nobel laureate, John Steinbeck. There are many writers about California, but Steinbeck stands out, as do the museums, the one to Rosie the Riveter and Wendy the Welder up at the city north of us. I'm losing it, as you can see. Memory fades quick. California has also a reputation for being the nuttiest state in the Union, particularly with its political choices. You know that we sent a tap dancing Hollywood star to be a senator once, but that was nothing in compared to sending Schwarzenegger to be governor. He couldn't be sent to the White House because he was born not in America, but in Europe. But he certainly made a splash in Sacramento. And then an all-time winner or loser, depending on how you look at it, was Nancy and Ronald Reagan. They not only went to Sacramento, they jumped across the Rockies and the Alleghenies and went to the White House. 8 years. So we had them here for 8 years and had them there for 8 years. And people used to say to us at Berkeley, you ought to do better than this. What you're sending us, this person talking is, by the way, Arthur Schlesinger, the court historian to the Kennedy White House, and a man who basically tried desperately to get John Kennedy not to choose Lyndon Baines Johnson as his vice president. But Kennedy knew that for a Catholic to get elected would be difficult at best. We get them now all the time, but we didn't in those days. And so to get an Irishman out of Hyannisport with money into the White House would take a Texan with oil money to give that final push. And so Jack Kennedy didn't listen to Arthur Schlesinger, well that he didn't. And we got this man. But before that, we had a California. He actually wasn't born in our state. We don't have to claim him that way. But Ronald Reagan represented Hollywood and California. And of course, he and the other man, this will kill most of my California friends, Dick Nixon, did get in the White House. Did you know that Dick Nixon, Tricky Dick as he was often called, was reelected and won every state in the Union except Massachusetts. And then in with a few years, he was impeached. Something that's going to happen now to somebody from New York who's tried to switch his allegiance to Florida, Mr. Trump. So you never know for these Californians. You can, in the case of Nixon, and also in the case of Reagan, visit their presidential libraries. Nixon is down in Yuba Linda in the Southland, and Reagan is north of Los Angeles. Both are nice. Reagan is a little splashier. There are all kinds of things you can find about people. We once had a Cal alumni dinner in the Reagan Library. And in doing that, I asked one of the librarians, I said, you know, Mr. Reagan had two wives, not only Nancy, but also Jane Wyman, a very excellent actress who won an Academy Award for Johnny Belinda. And how come there's nothing about Jane Wyman in this library? And he smiled and looked at me and he said, you know who approved everything that went into the library, don't you? I said, no. And he said, well, it was Nancy Reagan. Nancy was not going to have anything to do with. She did accept several very expensive gifts. The airplane, Air Force One, that served the Reagans, Boeing gave that to the Reagan Library, all things included. So I guess if you snuck down there, you could, and you knew how to fly a big Boeing, you could fly away in the Reagan jet. So you have two presidents in California. Their presidential libraries are here in California. And you've had other people like Schwarzenegger, who recently blasted away at the current president, and others who came out of the milieu of our Hollywood elite to try and give us the modern California. It's been a long, long journey for most Californians. And there are different parts of California. You could talk about the gold country, where gold was discovered. You could talk about the fact that that has sparked a number of things. You can go up to Sutter's Creek. You can go to the most awful opera ever composed by John Adams about women in the gold country. Or you can go to other famous places. There's a marvelous, marvelous town up in the foothills. Damn, I can't think of it. And I go there all the time. It'll come to me after I stop talking, as usual. By the way, the last time I was with you and we were talking about Mexico, I couldn't think. And we should have known that there was a great woman artist who was just here in San Francisco in a sense that they had a big show at the De Young. And that's Frida Kahlo. Instead, all I talked about was Diego Rivera. And then I couldn't think about the great city in Mexico on the southern Pacific coast. And of course, it's Acapulco. So we'll think next time, what was I trying to, Grass Valley, of course, wonderful place. And in Grass Valley, there's a house that was designed specifically by the great Berkeley architect, whose name now escapes me also, but she did the wonderful buildings that are down there that were done by Hearst as a little love nest away from Hollywood. But he had half of Hollywood visit him there. And so now I see it's, thank heavens, 3:59, and I want to stop talking before I forget everything. And I'll see you next week, I hope, at the regular time, Monday, 3 o'clock, and we'll have another subject. And I hope I'll remember everything about that subject. Take care and thanks for coming.